You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. Whispers of a murderer hidden in plain sight. He walked the halls of hospitals, wearing a mask of kindness, a gentle smile, a calm demeanor, a nurse people trusted with their lives. But in the shadows, something much darker lurked. For 16 years, Charles Cullen moved unnoticed through the medical system, leaving behind a trail of unexplained deaths. Some called him a mercy killer, others a monster. But what if he wasn't trying to save lives at all? What if instead he was taking them one patient at a time and nobody noticed? Who is Charles Cullen really? A man struggling with his own demons, or a cold, calculated killer hiding behind the sterile walls of hospitals across the country? The truth will leave you questioning how someone could get away with so much for so long. This is a story of deception, manipulation, and a system that failed to see the truth until it was too late. Get ready. The truth is about to be uncovered, and it's more chilling than you could ever imagine. Chapter 1. A Quiet Nurse, an Early Tragedy. Charles Edmund Cullen's life began in a family marked by loss and hardship. Born on February 22nd, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey, Cullen was the youngest of 8 children in a working-class family. His father, a man who struggled with alcohol addiction, died when Cullen was just an infant, and his mother was left to raise her children alone. Tragically, when Cullen was 17 years old, his mother was killed in a car crash. This double blow, losing both parents, left Cullen emotionally scarred and alone, struggling to cope with feelings of abandonment. It was during his teenage years that Cullen began to show signs of deep emotional instability. He attended West Orange High School but was a withdrawn, isolated figure. He was often bullied for his quiet demeanor and awkward social interactions. But as much as he wanted to belong, he withdrew further, and in 1978, he attempted suicide for the first time. Cullen's mental health deteriorated further in the years following his mother's death. He would attempt suicide multiple times in the years that followed, showing an ongoing struggle with depression. In 1983, Cullen enlisted in the U.S. Navy, likely hoping that the structure and discipline of military life would give him purpose. However, his time in the Navy was short-lived. Cullen struggled to adapt and was discharged after just a few years. His issues with mental health and his suicidal tendencies led to an early departure. By this point, Cullen's inability to form meaningful connections and his internal turmoil were becoming more evident. Despite his personal challenges, Cullen found a new direction for himself. He decided to pursue a career in nursing. He enrolled in a nursing school and graduated in 1987. His decision to become a nurse was perhaps the turning point in his life. It was a career that would not only provide him with a sense of purpose, but also set him on the path toward becoming one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. Chapter 2. The First Victims, a Pattern Emerges. Charles Cullen's nursing career began in 1988 at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. At first glance, he seemed like an ideal candidate for the job. He was diligent, intelligent, and well-trained. He held a quiet, reserved personality, which made him a relatively unremarkable figure in the bustling hospital. His colleagues described him as a dependable nurse who kept to himself and did his job with little fanfare. But beneath this facade was a man who had begun his killing spree, quietly injecting deadly substances into patients without anyone suspecting a thing. The first known victim of Cullen was a 75-year-old woman named Judge John W. Yingo Sr., a man who had undergone surgery for a routine gallbladder operation. Cullen, in the midst of his quiet routine, injected him with lethal doses of digoxin, a drug typically used to treat heart failure. This would become Cullen's method of choice, a silent killer that could easily be masked by natural causes. The victim's death was chalked up to complications from surgery, and nothing raised immediate suspicion. Cullen, however, knew that he had ended another life, and he felt a strange sense of power from it. This pattern, injecting patients with substances that would cause fatal overdoses, continued. Cullen didn't target specific kinds of patients. He didn't have a clear victim profile. His victims were elderly, young, recovering, or terminally ill. There was no rhyme or reason to his killings. But one thing remained constant. Each time he killed, it was under the guise of providing care. The hospital's response was lackluster. The deaths of several patients were marked as unexpected or complications during recovery. Cullen's supervisors were too focused on managing the day-to-day operations of the hospital to notice the growing body count. And even when the suspicious deaths seemed to form a pattern, the investigation was half-hearted, leaving Cullen free to continue. By 1992, Cullen had left St. Barnabas, his first known hospital. There were rumors, whispers in the medical community, but no hard evidence. Cullen had become a ghost in the system, a professional who would easily slip through the cracks, moving on to new hospitals as if nothing had happened. Chapter 3. Moving from hospital to hospital, the escalating toll. After leaving St. Barnabas, Cullen moved on to work at multiple hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. His ability to jump from one job to the next, without any substantial background checks, became a key element in his ability to evade detection. He worked at nearly a dozen hospitals over the next 10 years, with each new position providing him with new opportunities to kill. His tenure at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and later at Hunterdon Medical Center saw the same pattern unfold, a new set of victims, a fresh pool of hospital patients who trusted Cullen with their care. And once again, Cullen injected them with fatal doses of various medications, insulin, digoxin, and others. The result was often the same, unexpected deaths that baffled hospital staff, but rarely raised alarms. At Hunterdon, Cullen's killings grew more brazen. He was assigned to work in intensive care units, where patients were in critical conditions and where the line between life and death was often blurred. Cullen knew how to exploit these delicate situations, and his medical knowledge allowed him to manipulate drugs in 4 lines to cause heart failure or collapse without anyone noticing. The hospital administrators were aware of some troubling incidents, but they dismissed them as unfortunate coincidences. A few complaints surfaced, but no one connected the dots. Cullen's ability to keep a low profile was becoming his greatest weapon. By 1996, Cullen had murdered at least a dozen people, though the exact number was unclear, yet no one had confronted him. The hospitals were reluctant to fire him, as he was always considered a hard worker, someone who kept his head down and quietly went about his duties. There was no trail of suspicious behavior that could definitively tie him to the deaths. Cullen's charisma, his shy demeanor, and his professional appearance worked to his advantage, allowing him to blend into his surroundings and avoid suspicion. Chapter 4. A Personal Life in Shambles, the Weight of Guilt. As Cullen's killing spree continued, his personal life began to fall apart. He had married in 1987, shortly before starting his nursing career, and they had 2 daughters together. But the marriage was never stable. His wife, who later revealed that Cullen had a history of bizarre behaviors, filed for divorce in 1993. According to her, Cullen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She recalled incidents where he would pour lighter fluid on her computer or be excessively controlling. He also had a pattern of abusing animals and often acted cold and distant. Despite his personal struggles, Cullen's ability to maintain his nursing career was undeterred. He would continue to cycle through hospitals, each time leaving behind a string of deaths that no one could link together. His inability to maintain any personal relationships, combined with his growing emotional instability, didn't stop him from continuing his work as a nurse. He would often go months without contact with his daughters or ex-wife, retreating into the darkness of his own mind. In his professional life, however, Cullen continued to excel. He moved to Somerset Medical Center in 2003, where he would eventually meet his downfall. It was here, amid a series of suspicious deaths, that the cracks in the system finally began to show. Chapter 5, The Breaking Point, The Discovery. At Somerset Medical Center, Cullen's killings reached a critical mass. Several patients had died unexpectedly, and the hospital staff began to notice a disturbing trend. Cullen was working the night shift and was always near the patients who died under mysterious circumstances. The deaths seemed to cluster around his shifts, with patients coding and dying despite seemingly stable conditions. One nurse, Amy Lauren, began to grow suspicious. She noticed Cullen's pattern of administering unnecessary drugs, and a pattern began to emerge. Lauren, who had been working with Cullen for months, began to put the pieces together, realizing that several patients had died under unusual circumstances while Cullen was in charge. She was afraid, for her own safety and for the safety of others. Lauren knew Cullen's history of suicide attempts, his volatile mental state, and his strange behavior. She knew he could be dangerous, but she also feared for her life. Lauren went to the hospital's administration, but they dismissed her concerns. Desperate, she turned to the police. She agreed to cooperate with law enforcement, wearing a wire to gather more evidence against Cullen. For months, Lauren worked with investigators, secretly recording conversations with Cullen. Finally, after a long investigation, Cullen was arrested on December 12, 2003. Chapter 6, The Arrest and Confession. When Cullen was arrested, he initially seemed composed. He didn't fight back or resist. He seemed almost resigned to the fate that awaited him. As the authorities began to question him, Cullen confessed. He admitted to killing at least 30 people across various hospitals over the course of 16 years. The details of his confession were chilling. He described his killings in a clinical manner, almost as if he were discussing a medical procedure. Investigators were shocked by the coldness in his words. Cullen had shown no remorse, no empathy for the lives he had taken. For him, it had been a matter of control, a way to feel powerful in a life where he had always felt powerless. Cullen claimed that he was helping his patients, easing their suffering, but it was clear that his motives were far more complex. The emotional weight of his actions never seemed to register with him, even as the full extent of his crimes came to light. Cullen's plea bargain allowed him to avoid the death penalty, but he was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms in prison. He would never be eligible for parole. Chapter 7, The Aftermath, A Legacy of Tragedy. The arrest of Charles Cullen sent shockwaves through the healthcare system. His case highlighted deep flaws in the way hospitals handled employee misconduct and patient safety. Cullen had been able to move from one hospital to the next, each time leaving behind a trail of death, because hospitals failed to communicate and share information about problematic employees. Cullen's actions exposed the failures of the system, and it became clear that more stringent policies and better oversight were needed. Despite the attempts to reform the system, Cullen's case remains a tragic example of how one man's ability to manipulate his way through the medical field led to the deaths of dozens of innocent people. His story is a haunting reminder that even in a place designed to save lives, a killer can lurk unnoticed. Today, Cullen is serving his life sentence at New Jersey State Prison. He has expressed little remorse for his actions, and the full extent of his killings may never be known. While some may view him as a mercy killer, The truth is that he was a man who reveled in the control and power his position allowed him. His victims were not patients he was trying to help. They were lives he extinguished without hesitation. The legacy of Charles Cullen is one of deception, manipulation, and profound failure by the medical institutions that allowed him to continue his killing spree for so long. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.